Hey, everybody, welcome. This is David Chatham with Angel Oak Creative. Welcome to the latest episode of our Nonprofit State of Minds podcast, where we pick the brains of our nonprofit leaders and folks who are speaking into the nonprofit sector and helping us to change the world. So we have one of our world changers on today, the CEO of Next Stage, Josh Jacobson. Welcome, Josh.
David, thank you. Thanks so much for having me.
Sure. Next Stage, I heard about Next Stage at the Association of Fundraising Professionals event a couple of months ago in Winston-Salem here in North Carolina, and was intrigued. There was mention of social innovation. There was a lot of talk about corporate social responsibility and collaboration and all words that I appreciate and think we need in the nonprofit sector. So met one of Josh's colleagues and we had known each other, and I said, well, maybe we can get Josh on the podcast. So it worked out and Josh was able to join us, and we appreciate that. Tell us about Next Stage, Josh. It sounds, you call yourself a social innovation company. What does that mean? What do you do?
Oh my, what a question. Yeah.
I know.
Well, we started off life, we're celebrating our 10th anniversary this year. So back in
Congratulations.
2014, thank you. The entrepreneurship pathway, when you start off as a consultant, I really identified myself as a consultant. We were really a generalist management consulting for social good, which tended to be working with nonprofit organizations, strategic planning, resource development planning and execution, organizational strengthening, board retreats. There's a good number of people across the Carolinas who do that sort of work. And we did that coming out of the recession. So, in those first years coming out of the recession, things had changed for the nonprofit sector. The way things were in the lead up to the recession and sort of how things got done coming out of it were different. And
You're talking about like 2000,
I would say coming out of the recession, 2010, 2011,
okay.
2012.
Yeah. Okay.
I felt called to start my own company in 2014. I think based on the idea that, the tools and things we were using, leading up to the recession were maybe not as effective as what we needed to build coming out of it. And so, what started off as kind of management consulting in a general context grew. And, I've always felt called to new and different ways of doing things.
Yeah.
And we call that social innovation when we apply it to solving the big challenges that are in front of us as a society. So, affordable housing, access to healthcare, education that is for all in our community. These are not easy things to solve. And so the idea of kind of doing things differently really appealed to me. So over the last 10 years, we've evolved from what we would have called a social impact consulting company into a social innovation company. And you mentioned the importance of collaboration. So we're really focused on these kind of unique areas of intersection where we think collaboration and more effective ways of collaborating are needed and a place where we can be effective and impactful.
Before we get into what that looks like now, give us your thoughts on, and I'm not looking to bash the nonprofit sector here, but it's the challenge and kind of, and even the holy grail, right? It seems like that investors, Bill Gates and other folks talk about is this idea of collaborative work, right? Between nonprofits and the corporate sector. Why do you need to exist? Why can't people just do it, right? I mean, it seems like a great idea, but when it comes down to the rubber meeting the road, nonprofits just really are resistant to collaborating with each other, especially. They love collaborating with corporations because money, right? But, especially when it comes to that kind of, collaborative impact, right? Why is that so difficult?
Yeah, well,
Why do we make it difficult?
Yeah, I would argue it's not only nonprofits. I think, unique to us as Americans. In fact, a sociologist did a study and looked at every country in the world, and we come in dead last in collectivism. So the idea of
Huh,
working towards a common goal, dead last.
interesting.
We are among the most entrepreneurial countries in the world, and it's where we get a lot of our individualism. So we are a very individualistic driven country. And so that shows up in our private sector. It shows up in the agency that we take to do all the things that we want to do. So it's kind of in our DNA. It's a bit cultural that we are less inclined to want to work together. Nonprofits are certainly where we look at for that work, but nonprofits are, if we're counting on nonprofits to lead the way in collaboration, where our government and companies are reluctant to or unwilling to do that work themselves, we under resource them. Nonprofits don't typically have the resources to do that work. That's why they lean into working with companies and other payers. Is just they're resource deficient, but they're also set up, they don't have a profit motive. So how do you measure the impact of a nonprofit? Well, it depends on who you ask. And so we tend to create silos around the nonprofit, that they to just persevere and sustain themselves. They have to generate a value proposition that people want to fund, and giving and contributions, philanthropy being the primary marketplace for that. So for all those reasons, collaboration is a difficult thing.
Yeah.
Individualistic to the leaders of nonprofits and other types of institutions. But also, we think we're just not structured to do collaboration well. We reward organizations for the direct impacts that they create, as opposed to the collective impact of working together.
That's great. And I did not realize we were dead last in collaboration, collectivism. I can see that though.
Yeah.
Maybe the next time they do it, maybe we'll move up a notch or two.
Well, maybe so. Maybe we make some inroads there. Well, that's certainly our call to action. Our BHAG, our big, hairy, audacious goal is that we want to create a community and create a society where working together is easier, where we actually build trust between constituents, because we really see that as the major issue, is just the lack of trust. Our unwillingness to work with others outside of our institutions is because there's risk involved in doing
Yeah.
that. So how do we de-risk collaboration?
And I don't think that the idea of entrepreneurism and collectivism have to be mutually exclusive, right? I mean, it seems like you can, to your point of having a social innovation company, right?
Yep.
That there's a way to be both entrepreneurial and collaborative. I mean, I don't think that you have to. So it seems like if we could, bring those two closer together, that
Yes,
we would be much better off.
for sure. I mean, the best of both worlds, right? If we reward both collective effort and entrepreneurship. Yeah, so I agree. They don't have to be viewed as kind of opposites or at polar ends. We tend to set that up though around reward mechanisms. Grants go to the organization for their impact, where they can show that they led that impact. And there is no impact that's led by any one organization. Every person served is being served by many different organizations. There's no vacuums in social good, but we don't tend to acknowledge that or necessarily build up infrastructure that measures that.
Yeah, and most of those grants don't usually fund salaries that would go towards facilitating collaboration, right? It's more direct cost kind of things that are program related. So it almost discourages it. The kind of continuing that, one of the areas that, if I understand, that you all focus on is really creating a methodology or a way to encourage collaborations between the profit sector, the corporate sector, and the nonprofit sector. Tell us what that looks like, and kind of how you got to that place where you figured out that maybe there's a better way.
Yeah. Well, it's one of the intersection areas that we're really excited about and interested in exploring. I mentioned kind of coming out of the recession. One of the things that changed was how and why companies support nonprofit organizations. Here in our headquarters city, Charlotte, North Carolina, a lot of headquarter corporations based here. So a good backdrop for us to study this. The way in which nonprofits had secured funding in the years leading up to 2008, 2009, you had your events, you had your 5Ks, you would typically have a board member who would be able to reach in to someone inside their own company, or if they had vendors that they could reach into. And the companies that did it, supported nonprofits more. I call it kind of a slush fund of social good, kind of a feel good space. There weren't as many metrics. If you're charging $10,000 for a table at a gala, you got to wonder, what's the value proposition of,
Yeah.
ROI on that? How are we going to ever justify the dollar spent there in a world that, looks at, advertising in, thousands of consumer impressions, right? So, the reality is the way we were doing it didn't make a lot of sense, certainly not from a business standard. There were no sort of metrics that stood up how that's done. And as we began to explore it, we were exploring it from the nonprofit vantage point, working with nonprofits that were struggling, not able to understand why was that company no longer supporting their 5K? They had been supporting it for years. Why are they backing out? What's changing there? And what we found is that we really need to be on the other side of the equation. We began interviewing, players in that space, folks we would call corporate social responsibility leaders. This has existed in some form or fashion for like 100 years. Going back to the advent of the Industrial Revolution was the beginning of, companies, engaging in social good. But their why has evolved over time. We needed to explore what was happening in this last decade. And it took some doing. It took over 100 interviews with a variety of people to help us really understand kind of what was changing. And without getting too technical, it's about socially responsible investing. So we've all become more familiar, I think, with the idea that whereas previously as consumers we would think about what company we bought our products and services from, or as employees, where we worked, that those were big kind of movers for a company to want to consider, how their values show up. We now have different frameworks that, how you invest in your 401k. You can choose to invest into portfolios that are deemed socially responsible. And so, this has been a real kind of paradigm shift for companies. And as we explored that, we began to identify really a marketplace for nonprofits to be thought of more as vendors, ways that they could be, positioned to create, positive outcomes. So that exploration led to us actually working with companies as much as nonprofits. So we're hired by companies to help them build their social impact strategies. We work with nonprofits to optimize them to be aligned to those opportunities, and we serve as a bridge between the two.
What are you seeing as you're working with those corporations where do they put the value? What do they see as the ROI of those investments? What do they hope to accomplish, or be able to report, or, in those things?
Yeah, measurement, right? So, I think that's become more important over the years. So that really was not 10 years ago. That wasn't really what people were thinking, as they were the corporate social responsibility world would invest into. And they would certainly ask for, grant reports, but it wasn't as much about, understanding the impact, so long as there was a relationship served. So if the person who was doing the asking, the board chair of that organization, had a business relationship, maybe with your company, if there was a happy constituent there. These days, there's really kind of three big areas. One that's monitored is just exploring consumer preference. So how are consumers feeling about a brand and how it's showing up and its values. So we're finding that consumers are considering this more often. There's certainly examples of that where a company may be called out for their ethical practices, and so that might take a hit on the consumer side. Employees and so employee retention, employee recruitment, workforce is such a big area of focus for
Yeah.
employers these days and brands. So, as they think about recruiting and, these younger generations are really thoughtful about values. So, they want to see nonprofits served. But the big one would be, these days, a company really looking at the metrics and the impact that the nonprofits they invest into, because those metrics are now their metrics, meaning the company is reporting out on those metrics as a part of the socially responsible investing frameworks that they're evaluated against. And so we love that we've arrived at this place, because so often nonprofits wonder whether the company really cares about their mission. Is this do you care about what we're doing with your dollars? And now increasingly companies are. They want to know what those metrics are, what the impact is, and the company wants to be able to report that out. If you find a social impact report these days, if you Google your favorite brand, favorite company, and social impact report, you're probably going to find a pretty lengthy document that's published that has a lot of stories and graphs and charts, but also has a big disclosure in the back of it. More than half of that document is actually a disclosure about all the areas of impact that are meaningful for socially responsible investing.
We are weeks away from a presidential election.
Yep.
This is not a question I had warned you about, so if you prefer not to go here, let me know. But we're a very divided country, right? Which includes areas that we want, certain causes that want to be supported. How are corporations choosing to navigate that right now? Because I'm assuming that's a question you run into pretty regularly, right? Is, how is this going to affect our reputation if we're supporting whatever it is, right? Climate change, investment, if it's, homelessness or any of those things, addiction, any of those things that are, can be somewhat divisive, or at least have different ways of approaching it, right? So
yeah.
What's your advice for the corporations, or at least how do you approach that with them?
Yeah, well, I mean, the politicization of this world, for those of us who are in it, it seems a bit absurd, that we are being critical of companies being more thoughtful about our planet, about the people around us, et cetera. But we completely get that these are politically divisive, at times, topics. Certainly DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, has been under attack in a variety of ways. This had been a space that companies had been leaning into pretty hard over the last, particularly 5 years.
Yeah.
We all remember, 2020 and the kind of racial reckoning that came with the murder of George Floyd, and companies really coming forward and being more declarative about their goals there. Many of them have stepped away from those. And because there's litigation, and because, a company really has to be protective of its profit generation, particularly publicly traded companies have a charge to, focus on profit generation. And so, they have to keep in mind, the downside risks that come with standing these things up. What I'll share is that this is very unique to America. So back to what started us off, we're unique in our mindset around collectivism versus individualism. We're also just very unique in politicizing these topics. So, this idea of socially responsible investing, I say to some people, it's kind of the horse is already out of the barn. 1 out of every $7 globally is invested in socially responsible investments. And the expectations are that will grow to somewhere between 1 in 5 or 1 in $4 by 2030. So the reality is this is a huge, huge piece of the investment marketplace. And companies can't sit this one out. They can't just sit on a fence. And if they are globally expressed, as so many corporations are, certainly the companies that have their headquarters here in Charlotte, they're as expressed in the Europe market and Asia market as they are in the United States. So whereas on the home front, they might be more quiet and demure or careful about how they are standing up these topics, When it comes to Europe and Asia, they're way ahead of us on socially responsible investing. So it's kind of interesting because we are finding that it's not actually stopping anything. The companies that engage with us are still very focused on this. They see this as the future where they need to be focused. And while there may not be government intervention just yet in the United States, the way there is and commission and oversight as there is in the Europe and Asia markets, it's coming. We can predict a future where this is a foregone conclusion. So we're finding that, it isn't quite the cold shower that maybe it's expected to be from a political standpoint. And ultimately, the most forward-thinking companies, were already here 10 years ago, and they're not stopping.
So what does all that mean for a nonprofit who is interested in fostering relationships with corporations and securing those socially directed investments, right? Of that. And what does that look like for them? How do they be proactive about it or reactive, whichever makes the most sense? But how do they approach this?
Yeah, well, it's my favorite question because it's opportunity. And in fact, we crossed paths at the AFP conference this year, and I was speaking on this exact subject. How to help nonprofits become more aligned to this paradigm shift. We see it as a tremendous opportunity. It's kind of, if you've met one corporate social responsibility strategy, you've met one corporate social responsibility strategy, meaning, leading up to this point, every company was wired differently. That makes it so hard for a nonprofit to navigate. There's no marketplace. There's no agreed upon value proposition. So, what one company wants versus other companies, why they're doing it. One wants volunteer hours for their workforce. Another wants a cause marketing opportunity. We're starting to see more narrowing from these companies into a marketplace and a place where, as I said earlier, nonprofits are probably better described as vendors, vendors of services that companies can purchase and invest into. That ultimately what they're buying is impact. They're buying the metric, verifiable, quantifiable, metric-based impact that the nonprofits are creating. And they in turn are sharing how their investments are translating into impact. What that means is, though, that companies are not spreading it around the way they used to. So if you were used to having a fundraising event, a gala, a 5K, something like that, and it was about going out and getting $1,000, $2,500, $5,000 sorts of sponsorships, we're seeing that dry up, and we're seeing more companies who are going deep on some key topics. It's things that are probably related to their industry. So if you are, in an industry that puts something in the air, puts something in the ground, or, is a challenged environmental company, you're probably looking at how you are making investments in environmental sustainability. Professional services, financial services, probably looking at economic mobility as topics. So they're tending to narrow what they invest in, but go deeper. And this is where the opportunity is for nonprofits. One of the other challenges is just the lack of multi-year giving, multi-year grant making in corporate space leading up to now. We're starting to see more, alignment. So the same way a company probably isn't putting their vendor up for bid every year if they're doing a good job, right? So if a nonprofit is performing and the company is getting good impact metrics through that investment, the likelihood is they're going to stay with those nonprofits. And so this is actually creating a marketplace, just like other vendors, where if you do a good job, you're more likely to be able to renew and sustain and even grow that investment over time. So we think that's really great. And ultimately, it's meaning also that nonprofits are probably looking at having 3 to 5 important corporate relationships, as opposed to trying to maintain 15 to 20 plus. So going deeper with a handful of employers that really are lining up and are partnering, really seeing themselves in a partnership relationship with the nonprofit. We think these are all great trend lines. At the end of the day, getting more companies to do this. And the last thing I'll share is just while we tend to think of this as corporations, publicly traded companies, that socially responsible investing framework also applies to the supply chain of those companies. So increasingly, we're seeing the private kind of middle market, where it is a privately owned company, is now also thinking about its social responsibility because it lives into their biggest buyer. If you're selling to a publicly traded company, you're probably caring about this as well. So we're finding smaller companies are more interested now in the same sort of trend line, which means more companies, more dollars, more investment, and more impact happening in everybody's community.
Yeah. No, that's great. How So I'm going to break out an old school reference here, but short of opening the yellow pages and just kind of blindly picking a company, right?
Yeah.
Or Googling corporations near me,
Right.
Fortune 500 corporations near me, right?
Yep.
How can nonprofits find their particular partner,
Yep.
or how do they get on the radar of corporations if they're seeking those,
Yes. Yeah. Well, this is part of our message for nonprofits is adopting more of a business services mindset. And so rather than think of this, I think as it's been thought of like ATM machines or grants, philanthropy,
No, nobody would think about it like that.
right?
Come on,
Like
Josh.
the company's just sitting there waiting to give money away to nonprofit organizations.
Right.
I would say the same thing that Angel Oak Creative or Next Stage as a company would have. We have to adopt a business development mindset, which is to say that customers for our work aren't just sitting around waiting to hear from us, right? We have to adopt the sort of strategies that any vendor, any service provider is doing. We have to market. We have to do business development. We have to reach out and engage, not with a solicitation. We're not selling services day one. We're building relationships. We have to work our network. We have to build a network. And if we're counting on only our board to do that work for us, we can begin to reach through our donors and volunteers and other folks who have relationship with our organizations. We can adopt the mindset that there's opportunity everywhere. You have to have a strategy. You have to have focus. You have to have someone who is doing that work, someone who is taking responsibility for it. It takes time to do it. But it's not a shotgun approach. We would say be more precision. Finding a company that has what's called materiality, which is to say that every company has some sort of downside social risk associated with the work they do, and their area of social impact that they're going to want to invest into is probably related to the work that they do. If you're in food, then hunger is probably something that you care about. If you lend money for mortgages, then economic mobility is probably going to be an issue. So start thinking about how your mission aligns to companies in your community. So that's going to narrow right away. And then, begin to think about relationship building the same way any company finds customers. You have to adopt that. And I think that's a shift, certainly a shift from, just thinking your grant application is going to be what raises these dollars. No, you're going to have to go out and do some legwork to make it happen.
As a marketer, from my perspective, there's everything comes back to communications, right? And what does that look like? And I know I'm biased at that, and I'm guessing most other people think everything comes back to the area they work in. But
Right.
I mean, it's I'm not I'm not blind to that. But anyway, I do believe a lot of it comes back to communication and just being clear about that. What have you seen from from the nonprofit side
Yep.
that seems to work well in terms of engaging those audiences? Is it the phone call? Is it the email? Is it LinkedIn? Is it what is I know there's no magic bullet, but is there kind of something that you can point to as a trend or a preference or that kind of practical?
Yes. I would say tailored messaging. So, I think where companies are frustrated is the nonprofit comes in and presents itself through its own terms. So
Hmm.
it talks about why it thinks it's important to serve, as opposed to thinking about the audience they're speaking to. So we all know this donor-centered or human-centered communication. It's not what I think is important about me, it's what you are likely to think is important about me. And so I
Yeah.
have to tailor that message. I have to be thoughtful about how I present myself as a solution to your challenge. You as a company have a challenge. You have increased expectations around the social impact that your company is investing in and engaged in. And that's not a space that you know very well. That's not a space that you, the CEO or the person that this has landed on the desk of. So you are in a new space. Let us be your guide. Let us help you understand how to invest, how to be engaged in this work. Let us be, as the nonprofit you're thinking of investing into, a partner in doing that. So I think having really tailored messaging. I do think if you can get in front of an audience where it's not so direct, so it's a bit like, can you go present in front of a professional association?
Mm-hmm.
Find yourself into a space where you could be in a room where someone isn't feeling quite your narrowed focus on them only.
Yeah.
Can they hear this in a way? Could they listen to a podcast, for example, where you were talking about your area of focus and why this is something you think your nonprofit is best positioned to do? So that sort of marketing can be really key. Relationship, open, warm lead opens of doors. So yeah, it's the same thing that we used to do, board members opening doors, volunteers opening doors. Relationships matter.
Yeah.
No question, if you're sitting, with a cold calls rarely work in any context. So cold calls are hard to do no matter what business or industry you're in. So getting some warm leads that help, get your foot in the door. And then when you're there, have a tailored, presentation, a pitch deck. And we find good leave behind pitch decks. Folks don't want brochures, and they want something that they can show slides at the next presentation. Stuff that's printed tends to go stale. So give yourself some really good digital presentation. A video is phenomenal. I mean, video just goes so far with corporate America.
Yeah.
It shows sophistication. It shows what they're used to. They're used to doing business with other businesses. Projecting a degree of, going in kind of hat in hand with dot matrix printed materials. That's not going to get it done. You got to look the part.
Yeah. No, that's helpful. And I didn't prompt you to say all those things about marketing materials at all, just to be clear. But yeah, we appreciate that and agree with that as well. That tailored messaging, we talk about, the segmented messaging and just how important that is, that to be able to speak directly to an audience's interests, concerns, desires, all of those things make a big difference than just a generic message, right? So
Completely. And these companies hear countless nonprofit pitches, and it's always through the lens of, this is our nonprofit, this is what we do, this is why it's important. Look at this story, look at this impact. Rarely do they ever hear, I've studied your industry, I
yeah,
know your needs, I understand your challenges. We are
right.
a solution to your challenge, which is just, sales 101, right?
Solution
Aligning.
selling, right? Yeah.
That's it. You gotta get a little bit of a seller's mindset and recognize that what is important to you is maybe not what's important to the person across the table.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what they're buying is your services. And
Yeah.
so their why might be a little different. But at the end of the day, what's different about that than somebody's logo on the top of a shirt or someone's name on the side of a building? We've gotten used to understanding why donors do things and why sponsors do things. And we just have to get used to a different, value proposition for these companies.
Yeah. No, that's great. Um, most of the folks who listen to the podcast are executive directors or development directors or communications directors. Um, what advice would you leave with them around this subject of corporate social responsibility and getting engaged, becoming a partner?
Yeah.
What first step can they take, or what kind of approach can they, you know, can they take immediately that helps them make progress?
I think this is a great board topic. So often in our boardroom, we have a number of people who are sitting in positions of this change and transition happening inside their companies. This is just the new world we live in, where social impact and social responsibility is starting to permeate more of the business, the business framework. And so I think, talking to some of your board members, either one-on-one or as a group, and hearing from them, how is this showing up in their own companies? One of the things, and reason this is innovation, so we're a social innovation company. No one's written, the Good to Great book on how to do this yet. This is a trend line. It used to be bleeding edge. When we published our first report, Profit and Purpose, back in 2021, no one had heard these concepts previously. We are now starting to speak out on it because it's starting to become more and more kind of in the zeitgeist and where people are focused. And we think by 2030, it'll be standard operating procedure that every company, both certainly already exists in the publicly traded companies, but we're going to start to see more middle market companies embracing this. You're going to talk to your board members, and some are going to know about it. Some you might be ahead of your board members on some of these topics. There's a value to that knowledge, to that thought leadership, and starting to do that. I would talk to maybe some of your top sponsors, some of the key business sponsors or corporate grant makers, see if this is happening with them. Where are they in this conversation? We're finding, though, that, the corporate social responsibility person, sometimes the last person knowledgeable about this. So often they're kind of lower in the corporate hierarchy. This is living into, operations, living into the general counsel of a company. This is showing up in the C-suite. And so sometimes the folks that you've been interfacing with are not as privy to, what is happening at those higher levels. So, talk to some people who run companies.
Yeah.
Find your way into those discussions. And that's what we shared at the AFP conference in our session. We gave some folks some tools to go out and, start to explore this because, kind of being early, to be early on the cutting edge of this, we think there's an opportunity for nonprofits to be, best positioned, to be a go-to in your community because you get this and know how to do it well.
Well, thank you so much for all the information. If people want to learn about Next Stage and this idea of just the next generation of corporate social responsibility, the approach, how can they learn more?
Yeah, absolutely. Our website is nextstage-consulting.com. And so please come there, and we have a lot of resources there. All the reports that I've referred to can be downloaded there. My email is ceo@nextstage-consulting.com. So if you ever wanted to chat about these topics, we're open to dialoguing about it. And yeah, this is something that will always be a part of who we are. We really feel like we have identified and kind of cracked the nut, if you will, on how to do this effectively. And we're helping both sides of the equation, both companies and nonprofits, adjust to these new expectations.
Well, that's great. I mean, it certainly needed, and we appreciate that. Thanks everybody for listening. We have this is our second season of our podcast, which is a miracle in itself, and would encourage people to listen to some of the other episodes on the platform of their choice. If you want to go to the video and get a look at my face and the face of the other of our subject matter experts, we're on YouTube as well, the Angel Oak Creative channel there. So would love to have folks check that out. Any suggestions they have about what I could do with my head would be grateful. But, I would be grateful. But Josh, thank you so much for your time and your information, and look forward to staying in touch. And just encourage folks to learn more about the changing landscape of corporate social responsibility.
David, thank you. Thanks so much. And thanks to your listeners as well.
All right. Well, thank you, man. We'll see you soon.
Take care.